What up? It's your boy Moody Montana, Citadel Podcast, Smoke and Think. Yo, listen, right? Real quick, this is important. You know what I mean? Like, concerning the COVID-19 shit. I'ma say what I gotta say after this, but y'all just take a look at this video. This is important for everybody that y'all know that took that vaccination. I'm upset as hell. But just pay attention to this right here.
Thanks for having me again.
So one of the interesting things I found about this study looking into it is that it was a challenge trial in that they actually infected people with COVID. Can you talk a little bit about the scientific process and how they arrived at this result?
Yeah, it's a really pretty unique type of scientific experiment, which, as you noted, is called a challenge trial. And by challenge, they mean they are purposefully infecting people with a virus. This is not done in the States for COVID. There was one application made to NIAID, that's Anthony Fauci's agency, when he was there, and it was rejected to do a challenge study. So these are somewhat controversial because, you know, for the ethical reasons of purposefully infecting people. Nevertheless, this group in the UK at Imperial College did get approval and ran this challenge study that came out with these results.
And these results are, what walk us through, is that it looks at the amount of infectious material on the inside of a mask of people when they're actually symptomatic with COVID because they gave them COVID, and you know, fill me in. The finding and the interpretation is that what you really have to be wary of is people who are actually actively sick, not people who are infected but are not showing symptoms yet.
Right. So what's interesting is, unlike most studies where they're looking at transmission dynamics, they oftentimes involve some degree of modeling. There's a lot of confounding variables because you just can't control what's going on in the real world. You don't exactly know what's happening. But in this challenge study, this is a controlled experiment, so they know who they've infected, and they're checking them every day. They're monitoring them for symptoms. So you're able to have this very specific environment where you're able to get specific biological results rather than sort of conjecture that much of the other evidence is based on. So they purposefully try to infect a number of participants in this trial. They each stay in these private rooms for, I think it was a minimum of 14 days. And of the people who became infected, they monitored their symptoms, and they found that just 7% of the emissions that these people put off, and this was, they measured it in a variety of places. They looked behind their masks, so they had them wear masks for periods of time. They looked on surfaces, on their hands, and I believe they also took measurements in the air. And what they found is that just 7% of these emissions in their rooms, in the air and in the environment and surfaces of the infected participants just occurred while they were pre-symptomatic, which means they were infected but before they actually developed symptoms. And what to me is a real bombshell about this study is these results really run counter to the narrative that we were told from very early on in the pandemic, which was this idea that anyone could be infected at any given time. We all needed to do these various measures. Mask mandates for children, even if they were healthy, everyone still needs to wear the mask. Quarantining people, again, including children. If there's some kid who's infected in your class or in your school, that's it. You need to be quarantined for X number of days. Closures of churches, closures of businesses. All of these measures were based on an idea that people could unwittingly be infecting others because anyone could be infected at any moment and not know it. And what the results of this study suggest, and this is a small study, and there definitely are limitations with this study, like there are with any study, biological markers. They're actually testing people for their infectiousness. Unlike these other studies, we actually have real data to see, wow, only 7%. And I'll add one other thing that's really interesting about this study. Prior to this point, most of the studies that looked at infectiousness were looking at, and they were testing it biologically, were looking at viral load. They were testing in someone's nose, in their respiratory tract. What's interesting about this study is they looked at viral load, but they also tested these emissions that I was talking about behind the mask, in the air, on surfaces. And that, of course, is a much, much better marker, accurate measure of how much someone could be infectious, is how much, and what they found is there is not a really strong correlation between how much viral load someone may have in their body versus how much virus they're actually emitting into the air or onto surfaces. So this study really kind of blows a couple narratives out of the water, and I'm kind of astonished that no one else seemed to really be covering these results other than I did in my newsletter.
I do wonder if some of the lack of public reaction is that, while I think you're completely right about some of the early narratives around COVID, it's been quite some time since I've really heard many people pushing the idea that masking is necessary because of asymptomatic transmission. I think that a lot of that was all part of the discourse from earlier days, back when we thought that getting vaccinated was going to limit transmission, rather. And I think people are obviously very incorrect about that. And as a consequence, we've heard less about that going forward. I am curious whether or not the fact that Joe Biden stopped sending out the testing kits a year ago, the fact that there is no effort of doing any kind of contact tracing, etc., means that there's a risk of people who are in fact symptomatic not realizing that they are symptomatic with COVID, and therefore transmitting the virus at significantly high rates, the way the study shows is possible for people who do in fact have COVID, both in the air and on surfaces.
Yeah, it's a really good point. That part of the challenge is that sometimes people, I think what you're saying, people can have symptoms and not realize it. So we have to be careful about when we're saying pre-symptomatic, because maybe you have a little bit of a runny nose or something and you don't notice it. So that, I think that's a really important point. However, what I would say regarding that is, what's interesting is, I know my kids and millions of other kids throughout the pandemic had to fill out a questionnaire every morning where they were asked, a long list of questions we had to check off about various symptoms. And there were a number, there were temperature checks at schools. If someone as much as, sneezed, they were, ejected in a lot of places. So there was a hyper attention, at least with kids in a lot of places, to their symptoms. So I think even mild symptoms were likely detected. And regarding the sort of current environment, there are a number of places that have brought back mask mandates. It hasn't been a broad-based thing by any measure. But I think this test and what I wrote about, this study, what's important is it's also important for us to look back. So even if things right now haven't, brought back, mass non-pharmaceutical interventions the way they were in place in the pandemic, it's still important for us to have some retrospective view on what we did and what made sense and what didn't make sense. And I think this study, again, it's just one study, and other data may wind up, conflicting with this, but it's pretty robust, the way that they conducted it. And I think it's worth people pausing and really thinking about, wow, it turns out what we were told wasn't the case, most likely. And what I talk about in the article is that, the sort of classic thing of,
can y'all imagine y'all family members, y'all mothers, y'all fathers, everybody that went and got that fucking vaccination? This shit crazy, bro. And something told me not to get the fucking vaccination. And look, people walking around with shit in their body, they don't even know what's in their body. I knew something was wrong when they said that if anything was to go wrong, you couldn't sue. The vaccination is optional. Then we got Joe Biden, for everything, is just running around saying, what we do for such situations is we get vaccinated. Kid, what's going on? A wildfire. He talking about vaccination. Everything. Terrorist attacks. Vaccination. He wilding, bro.
If you're sick, stay home. That really would have gotten us to probably the same place after all. And we know that was the policy in a number of places, like Sweden and elsewhere, particularly in schools, where they weren't necessarily testing people all the time. And there's no evidence that they ultimately had more transmission or were worse off than places that had these far more restrictive policies in place. So that sort of real world empirical evidence we have seems, to my mind, to strongly buttress what the findings are in this study.
Before we let you go, does this suggest, and I've seen people in the American context suggest that the utter ethical blackout on doing challenge trials, that's coming under scrutiny. Obviously, we do animal testing, but animals can't consent to be tested on the way
human testing
that are thinking and can rationalize.
Testing on humans.
It seems somewhat short-sighted. If people want to willingly take this on and be compensated, that would not be an unethical thing to do if people are aware of the risk, and particularly at this stage of the pandemic where you could have healthy people, people who don't have immunocompromised conditions or who are vaccinated or boosted, who don't think the risks are particularly great, and probably the statistics bear that out and are willing to do it. Should we change our ethics around that?
Yeah, it's a great point. And once I started reading about this study, there's actually a pretty nice, rich literature about this topic, where you have bioethicists and others talking about the ethics of challenge studies. These have been around for a long time, obviously for different viruses prior to SARS-CoV-2. So there is an interesting debate to be had. I forget what the participants were paid. I could be wrong. I think it was something like £6,000 or something. So, if you're young and healthy, you're weighing everything out, you might say, give it a shot. As far as I'm aware, no one in the trial had any, serious repercussions. Like I said, from what I read, there was at least one challenge study that was proposed that was rejected by Anthony Fauci. And I believe he was on record saying that they didn't have any interest in pursuing challenge studies. So, like anything, there's some degree of risk involved in doing work that's going to bring you more accurate and more rigorous results than guesswork. And it's the same thing if you wanted to run a trial, for vaccines, for, masks in schools. When you have people claiming that there's not, equipoise and that you can't do this, well, fine, but then you end up not getting real answers. A trial like this, and we should all be thankful to the people who were willing to participate in it, gives us actual answers. So, it was a lot of fun writing this article. It was fascinating to me, and I'm glad to talk about it with you. I hope people check it out. And I should mention one more thing. In the article I mentioned, there was another study out of Stanford, which I had also written about, where they found a very low rate of asymptomatic infectiousness in people. Totally different type of study. And this also did not get a lot of attention. These two studies together dovetail really nicely. And
that's
I think
crazy,
really called
man.
into question the sort of 30 to 50% transmission that we were told could happen from people without symptoms. That narrative seems to be just totally false.
Viewers can check out those articles at silentlunch.net.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, yo, the crazy part about this is ain't nothing we could do about this shit. You know what I mean? Everything they throw at us, we accept that shit. You know what I mean? Like, Trump told us from the door that that shit was a fucking hoax. And we ain't to him. They made everybody look at him crazy. You know what I mean? Like, yo, I don't understand. How y'all I ain't saying that the man is Jesus, but when somebody for the people that's in control know how to make them get turned on. You know what I mean? Same way they did Jesus, same way they did all the greats, Malcolm X, same way, man. You know what I mean? Like, yo, it be fucked up other direction. They could just take the road and go here, and everybody would go right there. You know what I mean? Like, it don't make sense. Like, if it don't make sense to you in real life, don't let them make it make sense for you. You know what I mean? During that COVID shit, and I seen them first inject somebody and they start doing all that wobbling and doing all that foaming at the mouth and all that shit, I'm not taking that shit. Only thing they gonna do now is dull it out. Cut it with some water. You know what I mean? That's what the fuck they did. So now everybody thinking that they gonna die. For one, you ain't supposed to be scared of death. You know what I mean? But you thinking you gonna die if you don't get COVID, if you don't get the vaccine. You getting shit injected in your body. You don't even know what they putting in your body. They can't even tell you what they putting in your body. You know what I mean? But all you know is it's a new COVID test coming out. I got a new COVID thing variant. I got all this bullshit, man. Our president get on fucking TV and doing, I don't give a fuck what happened. He up there for a rape case. He said, well, what we doing to handle rape and such and such is we're getting vaccinated. What the fuck do that got to do with anything? Wildfires, motherfuckers drown, the terrorists attack, everything. This motherfucker just wants you to get vaccinated. He ain't doing nothing else but telling y'all to get vaccinated. All the promises and shit y'all voted for, he ain't did none of that shit. It's just crazy, man. Like how we just overlook what we supposed to be paying attention to. We overlook what we supposed to be putting our power into. You know what I mean? I feel bad, man, because it's mad people that took that got that shit inside their body and they don't even know what the fuck it is. It could be a tracker. It could be on and off switch. Anything. They could just flip that motherfucker on and you could go crazy, kill a whole goddamn house. Like, it's not saying that it's gonna happen, you know what I mean? But I'm just saying, like, we don't know what's in there. I know it's metal involved in that shit. Metal's connected to your nerves. But that's neither here nor there, man. I just wanted to put this out there, man, for y'all to get with it, man. Make sure y'all subscribe, leave a comment, you know what I mean? Y'all leave a comment, you know what I mean? Make sure y'all put a $sign up that motherfucker. Let me know that y'all read it, you know what I mean? Interact with me, I'll comment back, I send messages back. Anybody got ideas, promotions, anything, you trying to come up here, get heard, get seen, holla at me, man. Smoothie Montana. I'm out of here.